Tank Abbott, once one of the most feared men in the UFC, has faced a tragic reality at 60 years old. Known for his explosive fighting style, brash personality, and unrelenting aggression, Abbott became a pioneer of the early UFC and mixed martial arts world. But the man who once ruled the Octagon with his brute strength and wild approach to fighting is now struggling with health issues, financial troubles, and a fading legacy. His later years have been marked by isolation, failed ventures, and a sense of lost relevance in a world that's moved on. From a street fighting sensation to a UFC legend, Tank Abbott's life has taken a painful and uncertain turn. In this video, we dive into the tragic life of Tank Abbott at 60, uncovering how a once larger-than-life figure now faces the consequences of his violent career and personal choices. This is the story of the man who fought for fame, but now struggles with the cost of living in the spotlight. Tank Abbott's journey to becoming a UFC legend wasn't one of polished technique or a slow, steady climb through the ranks of amateur boxing or wrestling. Instead, Abbott's rise to fame began with raw, unfiltered aggression that was more at home in street fights than in an organized competition. Born in 1965 in Huntington Beach, California, Abbott grew up in a rough environment that molded him into the tough, brash personality that would later dominate the UFC. As a teenager, Abbott was known for his street fighting skills, regularly getting into brawls that helped him develop a reputation for being a hard hitter with no regard for conventional fighting techniques. In the mid-1990s, the UFC was still in its infancy, a brutal and chaotic sport where technique was secondary to the ability to fight dirty and outlast your opponent. This was where Abbott thrived. Unlike many fighters who came from traditional martial arts backgrounds, Abbott was a product of the streets. His first UFC appearance was in 1995, where he quickly made a name for himself by taking out opponents with brutal, no-nonsense power. He was the embodiment of the UFC's early ethos, a fighter willing to do whatever it took to win, even if it meant stepping outside the lines of conventional strategy. Abbott's debut in UFC 6, where he knocked out his opponent with ease, was the start of a career that would see him become a fan favorite due to his brutal fighting style and loud personality. His aggressive brawler approach in the Octagon made him a force to be reckoned with, and soon enough, he was headlining UFC events. Unlike the more technical fighters of his time, Abbott's reputation was built on his ability to outfight opponents in raw, uncontrolled fury, delivering powerful strikes and taking as many hits as he dished out. This no-holds-barred style earned him numerous victories and solidified his place as one of the early stars of the sport. Tank Abbott's rise to UFC stardom was marked by his brutal and unrelenting fighting style. He didn't just enter the Octagon to win, he entered to destroy. His style was raw, chaotic, and often appeared reckless. In the early days of the UFC, when the sport was still being shaped, Abbott's brawling approach was considered revolutionary. His strategy wasn't about finesse, it was about overpowering and overwhelming his opponents with sheer strength and aggression. Abbott's most infamous fights were often characterized by quick knockouts and vicious exchanges. At UFC 6, he earned instant recognition with a devastating knockout victory over John Matua in the first round. This was just the beginning of a streak that saw Abbott clash with some of the sport's biggest names, including UFC legends like Oleg Taktarov and Steve Jenum. Abbott was known for his aggressive persona, which carried over into his fights. He wasn't afraid to trash talk and taunt his opponents, adding to his reputation as a brash, unapologetic figure in the sport. His fame wasn't just based on his fighting ability, it was his ability to draw attention and create headlines with his larger-than-life personality. He understood that in order to stay relevant in a growing sport, he needed to be both a fighter and a showman. However, while Abbott's fighting style was wild and exciting, it came with limitations. As the sport evolved, Abbott found himself unable to keep up with more technical fighters who had refined their skills in disciplines like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, wrestling, and kickboxing. Fighters like Randy Couture and Frank Shamrock, who focused on technique and strategy, began to outshine Abbott, whose reliance on brawling didn't hold up against more well-rounded fighters. Despite this, Abbott's legacy in the UFC remains intact as one of the sport's original stars. brawlers, known for helping to popularize mixed martial arts in its early days. His rough style and personality brought the UFC into the mainstream, making him one of the most recognizable faces in the sport at the time. As Tank Abbott entered his 40s and 50s, the physical toll of his brutal fighting career began to catch up with him. The man who once ruled the UFC with sheer aggression and power found himself facing the painful consequences of years of damage. Repeated concussions, joint problems, and other injuries from his violent fighting style left Abbott struggling with chronic pain. His body, once a tool of destruction, had become a prison of aches and pains, limiting his ability to do simple tasks without discomfort. The years of sparring and brutal fights had taken a toll on his health that was hard to ignore. But it wasn't just his body that was in decline. His financial situation had deteriorated as well. Despite the fame and success Abbott enjoyed during his UFC career, his lack of long-term planning for life after fighting left him in a precarious financial position. In the years following his UFC career, Abbott found it difficult to maintain the same level of income he had enjoyed in his prime. His attempts to branch out into other ventures, including coaching and acting, failed to bring in the kind of money he needed to sustain a comfortable lifestyle. Abbott's lack of financial discipline and foresight during his peak years left him without a solid foundation once his fighting days were over. In addition to his financial issues, Abbott faced significant personal struggles. As a man who had built his identity around his toughness and persona as a fighter, the aging process and the fading of his relevance in the UFC world were difficult for him to accept. His marriage and relationships suffered as a result of his inability to cope with the loss of his status and the toll his body had taken. Abbott found himself battling depression, as the man who once thrived in the spotlight now struggled to find purpose outside the octagon. His wild, larger-than-life image had faded, leaving him in a state of isolation, unsure of where his place in the world was anymore. After retiring from the UFC, Tank Abbott tried to stay relevant in the world of mixed martial arts and combat sports, but the comeback he envisioned never quite materialized. Abbott's post-UFC career was marked by attempts to rekindle the fire that once made him a fan favorite, but it was clear that his glory days were behind him. His return to the ring and participation in several freak show fights was an attempt to cash in on the nostalgic appeal of his violent and chaotic style, but these efforts ultimately only served to highlight how far the sport had evolved since his prime. Abbott's health and age were major factors in his inability to regain his former success. As he moved into his 40s, the physical wear and tear from years of brutal fighting, combined with his unrefined fighting style, made him a target for younger, more technically skilled fighters. This became evident when he entered into several comeback matches, which didn't go well for him. In 2008, he fought for a small promotion, but the results were disastrous. By the time he attempted to fight again in the late 2000s and 10s, the sport of MMA had significantly changed, and Abbott's brawling style simply wasn't enough to keep up with the evolving techniques and strategies of modern fighters. His return to the cage was more about staying in the public eye than any hope of climbing the ranks once more. Financially, Abbott wasn't in a position to retire comfortably. His ventures outside of fighting, such as acting and public appearances, didn't generate the same level of income he was used to in his UFC days. In interviews, Abbott admitted that he struggled with managing his wealth, spending lavishly during his prime years without planning for the future. By the time he attempted to return to MMA, his financial situation had worsened, leaving him reliant on smaller promotional bouts and appearances to make ends meet. His efforts at revitalizing his career never fully took off, and he became more of a sideshow in the world of combat sports. What was once a feared powerhouse had now become a shadow of his former self, trying and failing to recapture the magic of his youth. Tank Abbott's personal life has been just as tumultuous as his professional career. Known for his brash, aggressive demeanor, Abbott has struggled with maintaining meaningful relationships. His former reputation as a hard-hitting, no-nonsense fighter didn't leave much room for emotional vulnerability, and this trait carried over into his personal life. Abbott's aggressive tendencies that served him well in the Octagon became a source of tension in his relationships. His inability to manage his emotions and his reputation for being hot-headed left a trail of broken friendships, strained family ties, and failed marriages. The emotional toll of his brutal career took a significant toll on his personal life as well. As a fighter, Abbott was used to living in a world where emotions were suppressed, and aggression was the only acceptable form of expression. However, as he aged, the inability to adapt to a more emotionally stable life led to feelings of isolation. His family life, especially, became a point of contention. Abbott has openly admitted that his relationships with his children and ex-spouses suffered due to his inability to balance his fighting mentality with the needs of his loved ones. He often found himself disconnected, unable to show the vulnerability and affection required to maintain close, supportive relationships. In interviews, Abbott has mentioned how difficult it has been to reconcile his public image with the reality of his private life. The tank-like persona he carried into the UFC was built on aggression, and that aggression remained with him long after his fighting days ended. With little emotional support, Abbott's loneliness deepened as his relevance in the fight world waned. His journey into his 50s was marked by reflection on the impact his choices had on his personal relationships. He came to regret the years he spent prioritizing fame and aggression over family, but by the time he realized it, much of the damage was already done. As Tank Abbott entered his 50s and 60s, the physical toll of his brutal fighting style began to show in ways that were impossible to ignore. For a man whose career was built on brute strength and overwhelming his opponents with raw power, the years of punishment his body took during his UFC career were now catching up with him. Abbott's body, once capable of taking and dishing out brutal hits, began to wear down with age. He started dealing with severe joint pain, back issues, and ongoing injuries that have kept him from living a normal life. One of the most noticeable consequences of his fighting career has been his deteriorating mobility. The damage from years of wrestling, striking, and absorbing punches has led to chronic pain in his knees, hips, and shoulders. These physical ailments are a reminder of the brutal career he led, and Abbott has spoken in interviews about how difficult it is to simply move around now. For a man who built his reputation on his physicality, it's a sobering reality to face the consequences of a career built on such reckless abandon. In addition to joint and muscle pain, Abbott has also experienced neurological issues, including memory problems and headaches, likely due to the numerous concussions he endured throughout his fighting days. Fighters like Abbott, who often relied on heavy, all-out brawling, are particularly susceptible to the long-term effects of head trauma. The signs of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, a condition linked to repeated head injuries, have left Abbott grappling with cognitive issues that were once invisible but are now a harsh reality. Abbott's struggles with aging and health problems serve as a stark contrast to the powerful image he once portrayed. The man who was once feared for his strength and toughness now faces daily challenges that prevent him from enjoying the same quality of life that he took for granted during his fighting days. His body may have once been his greatest asset, but now it's his greatest burden. Despite Tank Abbott's fame and early success in the UFC, his financial situation has been a source of great distress in his later years. Like many fighters of his era, Abbott didn't plan adequately for life after the UFC. While he earned a substantial amount of money during his peak years, his spending habits, lack of financial planning, and inability to adapt to a post-fighting career left him in a precarious position. As his fighting career came to an end, Abbott found himself without a stable income and with no fallback plan. During his prime, Abbott lived a lavish lifestyle, enjoying the fame and fortune that came with being one of the UFC's early stars. He spent money on extravagant purchases, including cars, homes, and a lifestyle befitting a champion. However, without consistent income from fights fights or lucrative endorsements, Abbott's wealth dwindled quickly. As the UFC grew into a multi-million-dollar business and fighters began to earn significantly more, Abbott's share of the pie became less and less. Abbott's post-UFC career attempts to stay relevant, whether through coaching, acting, or media appearances, did not generate the kind of income he had once enjoyed in his fighting days. With no long-term investments or business ventures to support him, Abbott has had to rely on sporadic appearances and smaller fights to keep money coming in. But even these opportunities were limited, leaving him with mounting financial problems. His lack of financial foresight has only exacerbated the situation, with Abbott admitting that he didn't fully understand the importance of saving and planning for the future while in the prime of his career. Abbott's current financial struggles are compounded by his inability to capitalize on his past fame. Unlike fighters who have successfully transitioned into media roles, business ventures, or coaching, Abbott has found it difficult to adapt to the new world of mixed martial arts and business. While the UFC has grown exponentially, Abbott's place in the sport has faded, leaving him without a clear path forward. His finances, once flush with the success of a top-tier fighter, have now become a major point of concern in his later years. As Tank Abbott approaches his 60s, the physical toll of his violent fighting career has caught up with him. Known for his brawling style and reliance on raw power, Abbott's body was subjected to intense physical punishment for much of his life. The man who once dominated with his fists now finds himself dealing with the debilitating effects of aging, including chronic pain, joint issues, and neurological problems. His health has become a constant reminder of the sacrifices made during his MMA career. Abbott has been open about the challenges of living with the physical aftermath of his brutal fighting style. His body, once a weapon of destruction, now struggles to function due to the accumulated damage from years of grueling bouts. Chronic pain in his knees, back, and shoulders is a constant issue, limiting his ability to move and engage in daily activities. These health problems have taken a significant toll on his quality of life, leaving him physically compromised in ways he never imagined. Perhaps the most troubling aspect of Abbott's aging is the cognitive decline he has experienced. Like many fighters who have endured repeated concussions, Abbott has begun to show signs of long-term brain trauma. He has spoken candidly about memory problems, headaches, and the mental fog that often clouds his thoughts. The potential for chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, a condition linked to repeated head injuries, looms over him, casting a shadow over the remainder of his life. The once powerful fighter who thrived on violence and aggression now struggles with the very physical and mental effects that come with living that kind of life. While Abbott's body may have once been his greatest asset, it is now his greatest burden. The man who once lived for the fight now finds himself fighting for basic mobility, cognitive function, and the ability to live without constant pain. The contrast between the young, invincible fighter and the aging man struggling with his body's limitations is stark. Abbott's current situation is a painful reminder of the price fighters pay for their careers, and it highlights the tragic reality that many athletes face as they age. Once revered for their power, they now deal with the consequences of that very strength. As Tank Abbott reaches his 60th year, he finds himself far removed from the limelight that once shone brightly on him. The UFC, now a global powerhouse, has evolved beyond recognition, and Abbott's once prominent place in the sport has diminished to the point of near obscurity. The man who helped shape the early days of mixed martial arts and who was once a major draw in the UFC is now a forgotten figure, relegated to the history books of the sport. The sport of MMA has moved on without him, and with that change has come a sense of loneliness and irrelevance. Abbott, once a fan favorite and one of the sport's pioneers, now spends his days in relative isolation. His fame has faded, and his contributions to the sport are no longer as widely acknowledged. His attempts to stay relevant in the public eye have been unsuccessful, and his post-fighting ventures, including coaching and sporadic appearances, have failed to maintain the same level of attention or income that they once did. The fame that Abbott once basked in has evaporated, leaving him with the stark reality that his place else in the world has changed. Abbott's personal life, too, has been marked by separation and loss. His relationships, once defined by his tough guy image, have fractured over time. The aggressive persona that made him a force in the ring didn't translate well into his personal life, and the emotional toll of his fighting career took a severe toll on his relationships. Abbott's loneliness is further compounded by his fading health and financial struggles. With no major assets or business ventures to fall back on, he has become a man without much of a future beyond the memories of his violent past. Tank Abbott's tragic reality is one that many athletes face as they age. Once adored, now forgotten, their health in decline and their relevance in the sport slipping away. The man who once lived for the fight now faces a different kind of battle, one against time, pain, and the loss of the fame and fortune that came with being one of MMA's original stars. Abbott's story is a stark reminder of the price fighters pay for their careers and the fleeting nature of fame and fortune in the world of combat sports. As Tank Abbott approaches the twilight of his life, his legacy as a UFC pioneer is undeniable, but the tragic truth remains. The fire that once burned so brightly has dimmed, leaving him to face the quiet, painful reality of aging and obscurity.